Hi, this is Joe Hage. I have the privilege of leading your medical devices group, which, as of this recording, has 333,000 members worldwide. And one of the reasons we have grown as large as we have is we have members like John Spear, who will give today's presentation about how to simplify compliance with the new ISO 13485. John, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Let me make sure I get into the full screen mode and start sharing what exciting material I have going for today. We got a ton of information to cover. Obviously, ISO 13485 is a very important topic to the medical device industry. Many of you are probably already aware that this standard was revised just a few months ago, so the 2016 version is alive. There are changes. We're going to cover many of those changes today and help get you prepared for this transition to a new 1345. So for today, the agenda is quite simple. I'm going to give you an overview of 1345. I'm going to go over some things that have changed from the 2003 version to the 2016 version. I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact that could affect you if you're waiting to address these changes. If you wait and wait and wait, what could that do to you? Conversely, if you start to put some of these things in place sooner rather than later, what are the advantages to your company? I'm going to talk quite a bit about EQMS software and how this can be a bridge to help you with that compliance. And then we're also going to talk about 5 steps that you can take for that smooth transition. And then Joe, at the end, certainly we'll have time for questions as well. So as we get into the session today, it's important for you to know a little bit about who I am and a little bit about my background and a little bit about Greenlight Guru. I've been in the medical device industry for over 18 years now. I've had the opportunity to bring over 40 different devices to market, all kinds of things from wound pumps to central venous catheters to airway devices, a wide variety of devices. I've implemented quality management systems dozens of times, going from scratch to full ISO certification. I've sat across from FDA inspectors and ISO auditors, so I've been there and done that. It's important for you to know that in this medical device industry, some of the top content in this space on things like quality management system, design controls, risk management, and so on are things that I've helped author. You can find those at a variety of places. Med Device Online, MedCity News, to name a few. We also at Greenlight Guru have the #1 podcast in the medical device industry. It's on iTunes, it's on SoundCloud, so go check that out. It's the Global Medical Device Podcast.
That is very cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's growing like crazy, Joe. We have some really exciting guests. It'd be great to have you as a guest on that event as well, on that show as well.
I'd be honored. And go ahead and maybe Nick, go ahead and type in the URL for that podcast. Back to the program. Sorry.
All right, no worries. I'll tell you a little bit about Greenlight Guru. Greenlight Guru is a company that is established to actually help make your life easier, especially when it comes to implementing and managing your quality management system. It is designed specifically and only for the medical device industry. So the entire backbone of our platform is with FDA 820 quality system regulations as well as ISO 13485. Yes, even the 2016 version. We also have integrated ISO 14971, FDA Part 11. For those of you that are dealing with quality management system, those are absolute minimum criteria that you need to have in place. Greenlight Guru also has support services from medical device professionals like myself, people who have been there, done that, who can assist you as you're bringing your products to market, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. So stick around to the end. You'll definitely want to do that. We have prepared for you, especially for you, Joe, your audience is going to get a special gift. We've created a QMS audit checklist. This QMS audit checklist combines both FDA quality system requirements, ISO 13485-2003, as well as ISO 13485-2016. So you can't find it anywhere else, and we're going to give it to your listeners to this webinar free today, Joe, so special gift. So I have 4 goals that I want to cover with you today. I want you to understand the major changes of 1345. I want you to understand why this change, why it matters to you. I want you to understand the benefits of taking action now rather than putting this off till later. I want you to understand how you can leverage technology to your advantage in the form of software solutions to manage and maintain your documentation, your records, your procedures. And I want you to take action. I want you to identify and understand steps that are going to be involved in taking action to addressing any sort of gaps or issues with respect to ISO 13485 2016. So now we're going to get into this. I'm going to lay a bit of the foundation for this material today. I want you to understand a little bit more about ISO 13485 2016, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of this. I'm not going to tell you a full history lesson. If you want that, Wikipedia does a fantastic job. Just go search for ISO 13485 in Wikipedia, and you can read the whole history of how this came to be. I do want you to minimize your distractions today. You should turn off Facebook. You should probably minimize Twitter. You should probably close your email window. Grab a pen and paper or whatever note-taking device that you prefer. Take notes, because this is edge-of-your-seat stuff. You all signed up for this. You're all taking valuable time out of your schedules today, so be sure you do that. So what is ISO 13485? And it's basically it's a standard. It's voluntary, but it is a standard that describes the industry best practice for quality management system requirements and criteria. This 1345 evolved over some period of time. It basically evolved from the ISO 9001, which is for general manufacturing. ISO 13485 is specific to the medical device industry. Now, there are several benefits to implementing a quality management system, several benefits to doing so in an ISO 13485 context. The big deal here is regulatory compliance. That is the single biggest risk that medical device companies are faced with each and every day, is ensuring that your processes, your systems, your documentation, your records meet regulatory scrutiny and regulatory compliance. ISO 13485 provides a framework for you to establish your quality management system in a way that ensures level of compliance from a regulatory perspective. That's the big deal. That's why this is so important. Your quality management system describes all of your processes, your procedures, the practices that you have in place at your medical device company. And it should do so in a way that meets regulatory scrutiny. And ISO 13485 has been put through the ringer, so to speak, from a regulatory perspective. FDA is involved, Health Canada is involved, the European Competent Authority. Regulatory bodies all over the world have set resources and included these resources in authoring this ISO 13485. So all of the major medical device regulatory bodies in the world have been a part of the creation of ISO 13485. I do want you to understand, though, that there are some things that ISO 13485 is not. It is not the law. Now, big difference between ISO 13485 and FDA 21 CFR Part 820, for example. FDA Part 820 is the law for medical device companies in the United States, or for medical device companies who are selling products into the United States. That's the law. ISO 13485, again, is a voluntary standard. It is not law. Now, it is based on regulations. It's based on regulations in Europe, Canada, United States. But adhering to ISO 13485 is not technically a regulatory requirement. FDA, for example, if you have an FDA inspection and you point to that ISO 13485 certificate hanging on your wall that says you're ISO certified, that's not going to carry a lot of weight with an FDA inspector. FDA inspector is expecting you to adhere to the FDA quality system regulations. And maybe you're hearing this and you're thinking that's a level of semantics, and we can certainly dive into that in much more detail. I just want to make sure you understand what the difference between law and a standard is in this case.
John, let me ask a quick question. So
Sure.
I have a client who has on his website that he's 1345 2003 certified.
Okay.
Is it a strategic imperative for him to get 2016 certified and boast that on his site, or he's fine with 2003?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I'll probably hit on it here in a moment, but I'll answer the question now because it is important context to understand. Standards, the 2003 version has been obviously in place for quite some time. It's good that he has that ISO certification based on that 2003 standard. Over the next few years, he will be transitioning to the 2016 version of that standard. There are certain organizations known as registrars who will come in and basically certify a company complies with the standard. And each of these registrars will have a timeline over the next, I think it's 3 years, that they will require companies evolve and update their ISO certification to align with the 2016 version. So if this client of yours continues their ISO registration within the next 3 years, it will be converted to 2016, which that's really the whole premise of why we're covering this material today, Joe, because there are differences between the 2003 version and the 2016 version. And if your client is not ready for that, and the registrar is ready to come in and do the 2016 certification, and he hasn't done all of his homework, it's going to be painful. He's going to be delayed. He's not going to be able to claim ISO certification. He's going to have to do a lot of work to get things up to speed. So that's why it's important to start planning these things now.
I'm only confused because of the way you used this slide and said not required, not law, not required, and then you said required.
Well, okay, so ISO certification is not, it's a voluntary thing. If you're ISO certified, it is telling the regulatory world that you have implemented a quality management system that has been objectively evaluated and audited by a recognized third party, a registrar. These registrars have to go through quite a bit of scrutiny from regulatory bodies, but the registrar has come in and objectively said, yes, medical device company ABC meets ISO 13485. So by that declaration, it's basically stating to the world that this company has a quality system that adheres to expected best practices from a regulatory perspective.
Okay, thank you. I'll let you continue, and I'll note that one participant, JP, notes it's not required for the U.S., it is required for CE marking and distribution to the EU and other places that accept the CE mark.
It's a generally accepted best practice. There are parts of the world where ISO 13485 is required. There are many parts of the world where we assume it's required, but it's not technically. So, again, we're getting into a lot of nuances. Just know this, ISO 13485 2016 is the current best practice with respect to quality management systems. So whether you are ISO certified or are not ISO certified, it is a fantastic guideline and helping you put in place the best processes from a quality management system perspective.
I'm back on mute. I'll be good.
Okay. It's your show, Joe, so anytime you have questions, just make sure you throw up some softballs in the air so I can just crush them out of the park, all right? All right, so why did ISO 13485 need to change? Well, as Joe alluded, he has a client that is certified to the 2003 version. Well, that's been the latest, greatest version of ISO 1345 for quite some time. Generally speaking, standards of this nature are on a 5-year cycle. Suffice it to say that ISO 13485 is long overdue for a revision. So anyway, there's been a constant evolution. There's been a team, a group that's been working on this for years and years and years. And over the course of time, it became clear that finally we absolutely had to have a new version of ISO 13485. The big thing is about driving towards regulatory best practices. I mean, for those of you that have been in this industry for since 2003. Think about how different the world is from a regulatory and quality system perspective in 2003 to present day 2016. A lot has changed in this industry. And keep in mind that the ISO 13485 standard has not changed really at all in that period of time. So this is a revision that's long overdue. But there's a lot of input that went into this, a lot of input from regulatory agencies, a lot of input from manufacturers, and making sure that this new version of this standard continued to meet expected best practices. Again, more and more bodies have been involved in this, like GHTF, Global Harmonization Task Force. Countries from all over the world, regulatory bodies from FDA and Europe and Brazil and Japan and Australia all had an input into this standard. So some of this had to do with just basically making sure that the quality management system standard is really driving towards more of a single voice from a regulatory point of view. Now, Joe asked the question about the client of his who is currently certified to 2003, and if this client could continue the 2003 certification or if they need to make some sort of transition to 2016. So the 2016 version is published. It's been published for several months now. There is a guidance that's going to be developed. That's probably a year or so away. Expect that very soon. But then the transition from ISO 13485-2003 to 2016 will be a fairly standard 3-year transition period. And there's going to be some variability to this depending on who your registrar is. I know that's, if you're already certified, you definitely want to check with your registrar, find out what their timeline is. I would expect that here within the next 12 to 24 months or so, there will be less and less new registrations for the 2003 version, that all new registrations will be only the 2016. So if you have any questions, ask your registrar, because each one will have a different practice, a different implementation timeline. So what has changed in ISO 13485-2016? I want to go through a few things today. I want to talk a little bit about things that could impact you, things that you need to consider as you make that transition. You should be making that transition to ISO 13485-2016. You should start that really now. There's no reason not to. But some of the big concepts are, we probably have all heard about risk management and how that's impactful to this. And that's one of the biggest changes to the ISO 13485 is this concept of a risk-based quality management system. And the 1345 standard puts a lot of weight, a lot of emphasis on the risk management principles and processes that are described in ISO 14971. For those of you who are new to this industry, you need to find out more about ISO 14971. You need to find out more about ISO 13485. You can contact me. I'll have my contact information here in a few moments to share with you. But we've written some guides for those things to help walk you through that process. And actually, Joe, we did a webinar with Joe Hage about a year ago on the topic of risk management. I know it's available on the Medical Devices Group page for replay, so be sure to check that out. If you don't know how to get that, contact Joe Hage, and he'll be sure to get you the link so you can review that webinar as well. As I mentioned, the regulatory bodies have been very much involved in this new version of ISO 13485. The big goal here is this thing called MDSAP, or Medical Device Single Audit Program. And I know a few of you on the audience today have had the opportunity to go through one of these single audit program audits. And I know some of you shared some of your horror stories. I'm positive that this process will be smoothed out. There's a lot of bumps in this process right now. I know some of you are feeling some of those bumps, so hang in there. We'll get through it. But the whole idea behind the Medical Device Single Audit Program is so that you can actually minimize the burden that each of our medical device businesses is faced with when it comes to audits and inspections, especially on the quality management system. if you're ISO certified and you're, for example, and you're also selling devices into the U.S. market, you might be subjected to an FDA inspection. You might have an ISO audit. And for every other market that you're in, you may be subjected to additional audits and inspections by regulatory bodies. So there's a lot of promise behind this single audit program. And ISO 13485 2016 starts to build that framework for that particular concept and that particular process to grow some legs and actually be meaningful to our businesses. The other thing is about making sure that all your documentation and records from a regulatory perspective are captured, addressed, managed, and maintained. The other key changes on 1345 is basically making sure, putting a lot more weight and emphasis on infrastructure, making sure you have resources in place, making sure that your resources have the appropriate skill set, training, and backgrounds to do various roles and purposes within your companies. There's also a much, much greater alignment between ISO 13485 2016 and the FDA quality system regulations. The 2003 version of the standard had nothing, no clauses, for example, on complaint handling, had no clauses with respect to reporting to regulatory authorities. The 2016 version has added 2 examples, complaint handling, has added regulatory authorities. There's a few other areas as well that we'll get into on the more detailed explanation here in a few moments. So as far as this framework is also identifying a clear objective or path from an audit perspective. The idea is that you have your quality management system that, of course, meets these regulatory expectations, but doing so in a way that's much more consistent from one market to the next. Now, I want to point out a couple of pieces of information in the ISO 13485 2016 standard. I want to draw your attention to Annex A and Annex B. And first of all, you'll probably hear me say this a time or two today. If you don't have a copy of the standard, go buy the standard. It's like $155 or something like that. It's well worth it to go buy the standard. No, I don't get an endorsement from the ISO organization, but yes, if you're concerned about this or you want to put ISO 1345 2016 in place, you first have to have a copy of the standard. So go buy that. Annex A compares the changes, the similarities between 2003 and the 2016 version of ISO 13485. So that annex is a very, very good guide. Some of you might already be ISO 9001 certified as well. If you're not aware, ISO 9001 also had a similar overhaul about a year or so ago, and Annex B actually compares the 9001 2015 to 1345 2016. So, a common question is sometimes companies, especially like contract manufacturers, may have dual certification with 1345 and 9001. Will it still make sense? Well, that Annex B will be a good guide, and the word that I've heard is that, yeah, it still might make good sense. So you need to evaluate your business and determine if that makes sense for you. The bibliography is also very, very good. It provides a lot of other reference documents that will be helpful in understanding a little bit more context around 1345. All right, so I'm going to pause here for a moment. I know the font is super tiny. It's somewhat on purpose, and there's several items that I've put in bold, italics font. And the reason these are all the clauses that are really impacted from the 2016 version of 1345. And the reason I've highlighted some of those in bold, these are the ones I'm going to go through in a little bit more depth and detail today, and because they're more impactful as far as the changes are concerned. But when you look at that Annex A table that I mentioned a moment ago, you'll see a lot more explanations. It goes into quite a bit of depth and detail. So let me just dive into some of these more impactful changes and talk a little bit about how these could impact you and your business and your quality system. The first area I want to dive into is the scope. The big thing about the scope is this idea of a life cycle. And I think that's been ingrained. The product realization process that's defined in the ISO standard starts to really ingrain that with us in some respects, but there's a lot more emphasis on this throughout the entire standard. The other key thing is having control over outsourced processes and understanding the impact of that from a quality management system standpoint. Also, it used to be an option to not apply certain requirements of the ISO standard, and this is still an option. There's a little bit more freedom to do so. Of course, you need to have an explanation and justification for being able to claim a non-application of a specific requirement. Now, I don't usually like to go into terms and definitions because there's some of these standards have just definition after definition after definition. But I do want to highlight a couple of things that are important about terms and definitions in this standard, mostly because there's quite a few new definitions that have been added. Yeah, a couple have been removed, a couple have been modified, but pay attention to the things that have been added into this version of ISO 13485. Notice that now we have risk and risk management. Those are key words to pay attention to. Notice that there's a definition for clinical evaluation. So there's been a lot of changes on the European medical device regulation and IVD regulation front that are going to be hitting us here very, very soon as well. So there's been a convergence from a definition standpoint, so it's important that we have that context as we explore and dive into ISO 13485 2016. I'm going to start getting into a lot more of the meat of the standard and some of the specific items that have changed as far as the clauses and the content of this is concerned. And I'm going to start with Clause 4, Quality Management System, and 4.1, General Requirements. Basically, everything about this clause has been completely reorganized. And the key things about focusing in on what documents mean and how that impacts your organization and defining the role of an organization, and really the key, this is where we really start to get into that key concept of having a risk-based approach with respect to processes. And this is a theme that it continues throughout the entire standard, and we're going to touch on this in a couple other cases today, but risk-based approaches. You're probably going to hear me say risk a dozen more times, and I think that's the key thing that we just have to start to understand is, ISO 14971 laid that foundation a few years back from a risk-based approach with respect to product design. Well, now those concepts, those approaches are being carried on to how we design and develop our quality management systems. And there's an expectation that as you make decisions throughout the entire genesis and management and maintenance of your quality system, that you're using this risk-based methodology to make decisions. Design and development plan. And now there are a number of these clauses that I'm going to go into specifically under design and development. The main design and development clause is 7.3. And then there are a lot of subclauses that fit under that 7.3 umbrella that have all changed. If you're speaking FDA, FDA refers to design and development, refers to that as design control. So for everything that I'm talking about today, design and development, design control, those are considered synonyms. And even before the 2016 version of ISO 13485, there was pretty good convergence and alignment between FDA and ISO 13485. And I'm here to tell you that the big changes from the design and development perspective of ISO 13485 increase the alignment with FDA. So if you're a company that's outside the United States and you've thought about going to the FDA market but maybe are uncertain about the FDA criteria and requirements, pay attention to what's happening in ISO 13485, because these changes in ISO 13485 are going to be in greater alignment. It's basically increasing the expectation, it's increasing the required behavior for design and development activities. So this is, a side note. You should know that design control deficiencies year after year after year are the #1 reason why companies get FDA 43 observations. So get your design control processes right. And I know a software solution that can help manage that workflow. I'll talk to you more about that as well here in a few moments. But in section 7.3.2, this deals with design and development planning. This was a bit weak as far as a clause was concerned before. Big thing I want you to focus on, traceability. Traceability is so important to everything that you do from a design control, from a design and development standpoint. You have to be able to link your inputs and your outputs and confirm that your verification activities demonstrate your outputs meet your inputs and that your validation activities address your user needs. So this need for traceability is now explicitly required as part of ISO 13485-2016. Design and development inputs. Been a lot of input or increased criteria around this clause as well. This concept of usability has been growing in popularity. I know the purists out there might chastise what I'm about to say, but usability, sometimes people refer to it as ergonomics, sometimes people refer to it as human factors. I know they all are slightly different sciences and there are nuances to each, but just know this. Knowing and being able to demonstrate that usability of your device, whether it's a software product, whether it's something that's handheld, doesn't matter. There's a growing expectation that you address usability, that you align with this standard, IEC 62366. Now, FDA is also putting a much higher emphasis on human factors and usability. And know that when you're putting together submissions to the FDA, that's an area that you're going to need to address as well. The other key things about design and development inputs, some of the changes, again, we're going to see this term risk management. It's happening again. There's an expectation in 1345-2016 that you're using your risk management process and your design and development process, that they're integrated together. There's an expectation that your risk management activities are feeding into your design and development efforts, and that you have specific design inputs and requirements that have been developed as a result of risk management. And this can be a really challenging thing to be able to demonstrate and to prove, but that's becoming an expectation in ISO 13485-2016. Design and development outputs is also an area that's changed. The verbiage and the wording that we're seeing in the 2016 version, again, is almost verbatim from what we have been used to in FDA design control regulations as found in 820.30. But you have to express design and development outputs that are in a way that can be confirmed through verification activities. Think of design, I often use this as an example, think of design and development outputs as your recipe for your medical device. The design and development outputs will list the materials, the parts, the pieces, all the things that go into your device, and they need to be stated in a way that allow you to conduct some sort of verification activity to confirm that your outputs meet your inputs. And we'll talk about verification as well. So design and development verification, you need to have, this needs to be planned, it needs to be documented, you need to have test methods and protocols. All of these things need to be established ahead of time. Yeah, these are practices that many of you probably have in place. They were not always explicitly defined in ISO 13485. So that's some of the areas as you get into what's changed about ISO 13485. In some respects, the practices that have been accepted and in place at many companies were basically mimicking these changes. ISO 13485-2016 in some respects is a catch-up. As I mentioned, the previous version of the standard was rolled out in 2003, and here we are 13 years later. So a lot has changed in the medical device industry from then till now. So many of you may already have many of these things in place. And so that's, in some respects, reassuring. But again, I want you to make sure, I'm just going through some of the more significant changes. There are a lot of items that have been addressed, a lot of items that have been added, a lot of new pieces in 1345. You need to do your homework to make sure that and determine how this is going to impact your organization. Don't just say, oh, well, it's just that a simple, they just changed the year on the cover page and it's good to go. Don't assume that. If you assume that, you're going to be in a world of hurt. You're going to have a lot of homework to do and catch-up work to do when it comes time to transition officially to 2016. All right, so getting back to design and development verification. Again, you need to plan this process. You need to have methods. You need to define your acceptance criteria. If you are doing some sort of test or analysis, you have to use valid statistical rationale and techniques that's expected. You need to have results that are documented. You need to have conclusions. So these are all things that are expected as part of design and development verification. Design and development validation is pretty much, you're going to see a lot of similar languages. Again, verification is demonstrating that your design and development outputs meet your design and development inputs. Design and development validation is demonstrating that that product meets your user needs. So there's a lot of similarity between verification and validation. This is an area where that clinical, I talked about one of those key definitions that changes. This is one of those areas where that impacts. Clinical evaluation is very much a design and development validation type of activity. And so there's a much heavier emphasis on this and the need for conducting some clinical evaluation as it comes to demonstrating your product meets your user needs. And so this clause in 2016 version of the standard has become much, much beefier as far as the expectations and the requirements are concerned. Brand new section. Can you believe that ISO 13485 2003, it didn't even talk about really design transfer at all. And I think there was some implied nature behind it that, of course, eventually you're going to transition out of design and development and eventually into production, but there was no explicit requirement for design transfer. Now, keep in mind in A2030, the FDA design control regulations, there is a clause for design transfer. The good news is, again, that these ISO 1345 and FDA are going to be pretty much not word for word, but the concepts, the expectations are identical. So design transfer, brand new to ISO world. Now you need to have processes in place that describe the transition from development into production or into manufacturing. You need to make sure those design outputs, I mentioned those design and development outputs being the recipe for your device. The other thing you should think about from design and development outputs is that's your preliminary device master record, which the clause in ISO 13485 is medical device file. And I'm not touching on that today, but that's in section 4.2.3 of ISO 13485. There's an expectation that your design outputs demonstrate that your product is ready to be manufactured. Once you transition and transfer that to production, you need to maintain a medical device file, or in FDA terms, a device master record that identifies all your drawings, parts, pieces, specifications, so on and so forth that are required to build, quote, build your product. I know some of you have software products, so build may be an operative term. But anyway, very important that you have processes in place to describe design transfer. Control of design and development changes. I mean, this was in place already, but there's an emphasis again here on this usability concept. There's an emphasis on safety and regulatory and making sure that those parts and pieces are captured anytime you make a design change. Design change could also mean something that you've changed after you've released into production, and now you have to change a material or a component or a part or a piece or what have you. Anytime you do that, you need to basically evaluate the impact of that change. How does it impact your form, fit, function? What does it do from a regulatory perspective? Do you have to go back and repeat some design and development activities? Does this trigger new design and development inputs? All of those things are factors as part of design and development changes. And then another new clause, design and development file. That's right, ISO 13485-2003 did not have a requirement or an explicit expectation for having a design and development file. 13485-2016 has now made this an explicit requirement. Many of you are probably capturing these details already. The FDA corollary to this is a design history file, or DHF. So yes, both FDA and ISO now require a design and development file, or DHF, for your design and development activities. Other clauses that are impacted, have some significant impact. Big ones here are purchasing related clauses. 741, 742, 743, these all relate to purchasing, supplier controls. Again, here we see that concept of risk-based. When you're identifying suppliers and where you're going to buy and purchase materials, components, services, whatever the case may be, you need to be using risk-based decision-making processes on those suppliers that you're using. And depending on the risk that component or that material or that service poses in your finished medical device is directly commensurate with the level of control and scrutiny and monitoring that you need to put in place for your suppliers. I've implemented approved supplier lists. I've implemented supplier evaluation, monitoring, qualification, the whole gamut from a supplier management perspective. And oftentimes, we've implemented those approaches where you're doing some sort of evaluation on the criticality of that particular supplier. The expectations are being ramped up. You need to have appropriate controls in place, which may drive you to do more activity as far as supplier qualification and monitoring. You may need to do more work on supplier audits and things of that nature. So again, what you do needs to be defined, needs to be proceduralized, and it needs to be directly commensurate with the risk that material, product, service that you're buying poses to your medical device. So you can see how all this stuff is starting to feed together. It's a continuum. It's a total life cycle process. So let's shift gears a little bit and start to talk about the importance of addressing the changes in ISO 13485 and doing so sooner rather than later. So again, risk-based QMS. This is the world that we need to all start living in. The world in the regulatory environment, certainly in the medical device industry, has absolutely shifted to risk-based approach. If you recall, if you were part of that webinar that I did with the Medical Devices Group and Joe Hage about a year or so ago, when we talked about risk management, I believe I predicted that risk management would be the single biggest area of focus for regulatory agencies in the medical device industry for the next several years. And we're certainly in that era right now. When you go to a conference or an event where FDA speaks and the FDA speaker uses risk management and risk-based approach and risk-based QMS, and that's part of what they're speaking about, we should sit on the edge of our seat, take note, and pay attention, because FDA is saying this, other regulatory bodies are saying this. This is where we need to be making sure our companies are moving as well. And really, it's all about making sure, at the end of the day, we're making medical devices. And medical devices sometimes save lives, and they certainly improve the quality of life. And it just makes good sense, I mean, from a business perspective, that the products that we design, we manufacture, and that we sell and are used, that they're safe, that they're effective. And we want to make sure that we've mitigated risk out of our products. It's just common sense. That's why I got into the industry. I suspect that's why many of you are in the industry. So just take a moment and pause and think about, what if your product that you're designing, you're developing, was used on your mom, your kid, your grandmother, your grandpa? This is why we do this, folks. And I don't know about you, but eliminating or reducing risk as much as possible is pretty important to my family, and I'm sure that it is for yours as well. really it's all about better processes. You know, if you have a well-defined approach, a well-defined methodology, it should be something that allows repeatability. It can reproduce the consistent, somewhat predictable results. So this goes across the entire quality management system to make sure that you know that your team, your resources, your infrastructure, your personnel can follow these processes and procedures that you implement in a way that's going to ensure that the products that are being designed, manufactured, developed, so on and so forth, are as safe and effective as possible. The other key thing about these changes is making sure that you have better alignment with regulatory expectations. That's the key thing. Safe, effective alignment with requirements. So there are a lot of costs that are involved in certainly keeping, managing, and maintaining a quality management system. I got a news flash for you. If you were not aware of cost of establishing, maintaining, and implementing a quality management system, or for some reason you still think that it's optional to you, get out of the medical device industry. I don't want you developing or designing any devices that have any chance of being used on me or my family. A quality management system is a framework. It is an expected best practice. It is requirements. And in some parts of the world, it is the law. So if you're not willing to do that, then you're not willing to do what it takes to be a medical device company. So you should stop listening to this webinar. You should go do something else for the next few minutes of this time that we had allotted for today. But there are costs that are involved. If you already have a quality management system and you already have ISO 13485 in place and you already align with FDA, the cost to transition to 2016 may not be as significant as a company that has nothing in place. And please, 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 if you already have a device to market and you already have regulatory clearance and for some reason you don't have a quality management system, but now you're suddenly realizing how important that is, please contact me. We'll get you squared away as quickly as possible. It's better to do it now than never at all. Because I can assure you if you have an inspection or an audit from a regulatory body, that's not going to be a fun experience. And it's going to be a very, very expensive endeavor for you to get things corrected. And you're going to have a black eye when it comes to regulatory perspectives. But it's very important that as you build this quality management system, you want to make sure that you do so in a way that is appropriate and the right size for the type of company that you are. And you want to make sure that you have alignment with regulatory bodies. Because guess what? Those are the resources that are going to come in and look at your compliance and assess your quality management system and make sure that what you have in place passes muster and generates the documentation and records that are expected. Now, as you consider the state of your quality management system, there are ways that you can optimize some efficiency. And yes, it is possible for software to help simplify your compliance efforts, especially when there's a software solution such as Greenlight Guru that's been designed specifically for this challenge. We have built this product, this platform, to align with FDA regulations, to align with ISO 13485, yes, even the 2016 version, to align with ISO 14971, to build risk-based quality management system and approaches. That's embedded into the Greenlight software platform. And part of the Greenlight platform is about what we call the SMART 5-phase QMS methodology. And to go into just a little bit of that, you know, there's an approach to this. First, you're going to scope out the initiatives from a quality management system. You're going to start to go into the make phase of your quality management system efforts and bite off and build and bootstrap your quality management system as you go through this process. You're going to get to a point as you're developing your devices where you're going to send those off for regulatory clearance and approvals. You're going to get that authorization as part of that approved phase, and then you're going to move towards the release of these devices into the marketplace. And then all along the scope, make, approve, release phase, you're building your quality management system or refining your quality management system. And then once you release, you're going to track. A big key part, as defined in ISO 13485, is this idea of continuous process improvement, this idea of a continuum, a life cycle, not only from a product level, but also from a company level, also from a quality management system level. So there's an expectation that you're tracking and monitoring and maintaining your quality management system over time. Key thing about your quality management system is you want it to be bulletproof. There's a few components of making sure that your quality management system is bulletproof. It's three prongs: people, processes, technology. People, those are you, the people who are willing and investing their time, effort, and energy to participate in webinars and events like this. That's key. That starts the whole process. Process, that's another key component of establishing a bulletproof quality system. Things like being aware 1345 is changing, understanding that you need to have a smart methodology in place in order to identify the impact and the gaps of those changes and how that's going to affect your company. And then technology, this is what I'm about to dive into. This is where Greenlight helps you as part of that three-prong approach. But it's important to implement a bulletproof system because, well, we've talked about how impactful this is from a legal perspective. If you're a medical device company, it is required. It's going to help. I know it's going to help you get to market faster. If you do this the right way, a quality management system actually aids you and helps you in getting to the market faster, and do so in a way that's just overall smarter and more risk adverse, and do so in a way that allows you to streamline efficiency throughout the entire process. It allows you to focus on what's important to that medical device rather than filling out 10 extra forms because your inefficient process says that that's what you have to do. So you remember a moment ago when I talked about some of the changes in the design and development clauses of 1345. Now there's a requirement for traceability. Traceability is so important at every step along the way. And this idea of objective evidence means that you've got documented records, documented results. And if you have that traceability component and the objective evidence, then you've got the keys to the kingdom. You have everything that you need when it comes to quality management system and quality records and compliance as such. I had a manager tell me many years ago that if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. And if you've ever been across from an ISO auditor or an FDA inspector and you're asked to answer or address a particular question or comment that comes up, they're always going to ask for documented objective evidence. They will never just take your word for it. And so that's a key concept. You have to have documentation in place, and you have to have the assurance that that is in a spot where you know where you can find it. It shouldn't be buried on somebody's desk. But sometimes we think about traceability and documentation and how long this can take. Yeah, I understand that it certainly feels that way. And if it feels like it's too complicated to address traceability and too complicated to address your documentation, then you definitely need to get a hold of me. Contact us at Greenlight.Guru. Request to talk to somebody, because if it's taking too long and it's too complicated, your system needs to be overhauled, and we can help. Because let's be real, I mean, you're professionals. You are very smart people. You're more than just a person that can push paper around. And Joe, I meant to point out here, I think this guy's nostrils in this picture are bigger than the beard I had last year when I did that risk management webinar. But anyway, you need to focus on what you do best, whether that's designing products or addressing regulatory submissions or managing your quality system. Focus on those things, not just being a paper pusher, because this is why your companies need to improve. Paper is very, very expensive. And it's amazing to me that even in the year 2016 that more companies have paper-based quality management systems in place and documentation systems in place than any other type of solution. It's crazy. And I think there's this conventional wisdom, and know this, conventional wisdom is always wrong. Conventional wisdom says that a paper-based quality management system is the cheapest and the easiest. And I'm telling you folks, it's just wrong. It's just dead wrong. It is not. We have case studies, we have documented evidence at Greenlight Guru that will prove to you that paper is by far and away the most expensive. And don't just take our word for it. There have been organizations such as LNS Research who have been evaluating all of the best practices when it comes to quality management systems and how companies do this. And what LNS Research found is that those who still have paper-based systems in place are the lowest level of sophistication. They're ad hoc. They're still trying to hack everything together. The market leaders have realized paper is not the way to go. The market leaders have realized electronic quality management systems designed for the medical device industry are the way to solve this problem. So with a paper-based system, you're going to have missing documents. You're going to have missing records. Your document revisions are going to be out of sync. You're going to have things that are lost to never be found. I can guarantee it. And nothing is more painful than sitting across from an auditor and being asked to produce a record and not being able to find it. It will happen to you. With a Greenlight Guru experience, it's impossible to have a procedure or document or record be published and have missing signatures. We've designed the workflow to ensure audit success. Plain and simple. It's your best case. It's your best situation. So why not take advantage of that? We make sure that all of your documentation and records, your procedures, your forms, everything that you need to control is stored under one roof, in one location, a single source of truth. We've integrated workflows for design control and risk management. So all of the things that you go through design and development and risk management align with one another, and oh yeah, they meet 1345 and they meet ISO 14971, and they also integrate with your entire documentation and record keeping system. So it's really pretty simple if you're comparing Greenlight to paper. There are 10 ways that can save time by using a Greenlight Guru approach. I'm not going to read every one of these. You're smart people. We already know you can do more than push paper around. You're designing some of the best technologies in the world today to save lives. But simply put, let's get you back to doing that rather than trying to figure out where that red folder is on Tommy's desk, or why Mary, what happened to her work when she's on vacation next week. You know, where is that, all that paper, where is it going to go? Let's get you focused on prioritizing your work, making sure that you're focused on traceability, making sure that you're designing medical devices that are safe and effective. And just to give you some glimpse, we've designed a whole new, fresh user interface, 2016 software designed for medical device professionals that allow you to easily and seamlessly manage workflows, be able to see where documents, records are in the system. So,
John, just a quick housekeeping note. We're almost at the top of the hour. I know that you're almost finished. We have a couple of questions in the queue. For folks who need to drop off at the top of the hour, know that I've already uploaded the slides on the website. I'll be sharing that link in a moment. If you all go for it at once, my site will crash. Apologies in advance. And we are going to record beyond the top of the hour. So, John, if you can stay on just a little bit to answer some questions, we'll continue. And if you do have to drop off, I'll send you a link to them so that you can hear what everyone had to say.
All right. And do stick around for a couple minutes if you're able to, so that way we can be sure to get you that QMS audit checklist that we prepared for this audience. And I just have a few more slides, so a few more opportunities or challenges that you're going to run into using paper-based. You're going to have a hard time with traceability. You know, for those of you that have built traceability matrices using like a spreadsheet, try integrating that with risk management. You can't do it. I mean, okay, sure. I'm sure some of the contrarians in the audience will try to prove me wrong and write some macros that will work only for you, but it's just really limiting your ability to scale and grow your business. it's time consuming. It's spending time on low or no value add activities. So in Greenlight, we've focused on a workflow that aligns with ISO 13485-2016, that aligns with FDA, and allows you to manage and maintain and focus on that traceability component that's becoming more and more important and expected from a regulatory perspective. So there's a lot of problems with some of the other solutions that are out there. They're hard to use. I mean, paper is hard to use. Trying to keep file cabinets managed and maintained, server-based documentation, other legacy battleship solutions that are out there, they are not designed for the needs of a medical device professional. And so that's something that I want you to keep in mind. They also don't even know what ISO 13485-2016 is. They're not even aware of that yet, and they certainly do not know how that's going to impact your business the way that we do. So keeping track of design controls and risk management, it's about a continuum. It's about knowing where your product is at various stages and being able to identify the risk and reduce and mitigate that risk throughout that entire product life cycle. So when you combine the practices, best practices that we have in place at Greenlight Guru, aligning with all of these regulations that I've mentioned to you already, FDA 20, Part 11, ISO 1345, ISO 14971, with the medical device professionals that we have on the Greenlight Guru team, implementing 1345-2016 is going to be a breeze. All you have to do is go to Greenlight Guru, click a button, request a demo, and we're going to have a fantastic discussion. We're going to help make sure that your compliance with 1345-2016 is as simple as it can possibly be. Remember when I talked about a bulletproof quality management system, people and processes, technology. As I said, you guys are the people. You've invested your valuable time to participate in today's webinar. Your processes, yeah, we have the SMART 5-phase QMS methodology that we'll work with you on. Yes, you have processes that are defined. And the third part of that piece that's vital to you is the technology piece. And yes, that's where Greenlight Guru can come in and be an asset to help you gain some horsepower and efficiency in your efforts in your quality management system. So there's 5 steps to get going. Number 1, as I mentioned, you've got to get a copy of this ISO 13485 standard. It's $155. You got to buy it because without it, you have no idea what the expectations and requirements. Know that there are differences between 2003 and 2016, and this is pretty well defined in the Annex A of the 2016 standard. It's not as simple as waking up tomorrow and just flipping a switch and thinking that you can be good to go. You will have to make improvements to your quality management system. That leads me to number 3. Conduct a gap analysis of your existing quality management system versus the ISO 13485-2016. And if you want that free QMS audit checklist and you want to schedule your free 30-minute strategy session, here's a link to do so, greenlight.guru/QMS-audit-checklist. Click that, sign up, you'll get the checklist, you'll get a free 30-minute QMS strategy session, and we'll help get you on your way to ISO 1345-2016 compliance. The 4th key step, get a hold of your registrar. Find out what their timeline is. That's going to be key. And then number 5, make sure you establish a quality plan based on the results of your gap analysis and your registrar timeline. So again, if you want that free checklist, it defines a roadmap for FDA 820 as well as ISO 13485-2003 and ISO 13485-2016. You have all 3 versions that are all contained in one simple, easy to follow checklist. All you have to do is go to greenlight.guru/QMS-audit-checklist. So, key takeaways. The reason for the change of 13485 is really about increasing the expectations for medical device companies, making sure that you have risk-based methodologies in place, align with regulatory expectations such as programs like the Medical Device Single Audit Program, which is expected to roll out in 2017. So it's about better visibility and alignment with those expectations for the medical device industry. Again, take action. Find somebody, put them in charge, make them take action as far as getting you where you need to go from compliance with 1345-2016, and follow these 5 steps. So, Joe.
They are lined up with questions.
All right, I'm ready.
On Greenlight.Guru, Sarah asks, there is a startup program. We're not a spin-out of a named incubator. We are, we are now a spin-out. Is it possible to apply as a startup?
Sure, absolutely. And Sarah, the best way to do that is to take that link that you see on screen and click that link, at least get that free checklist at a minimum. We'll get that 30-minute conversation scheduled with you, and we'll learn a lot more about your startup and how the Greenlight platform can help you.
Peter asks, is there a new approach with respect to QBD, Six Sigma techniques, and SPC, continuous process verification?
Well, I'm not sure the specific details of Peter's questions, but there's the QBD and Six Sigma. These are all quality methodologies that are used to analyze processes. I mean, there's a lot of parallels between like a Six Sigma approach. Six Sigma uses the DMAIC approach, which is pretty much in alignment with the ISO 1345 methodology of Plan, Do, Check, Act, as well as some alignment with the smart 5-phase QMS methodology that we've established at Greenlight Guru. So I don't know that there's a new methodology or tool set per se. We've evolved the smart 5-phase methodology to basically meet the needs of the medical device industry and align with FDA and ISO 1345.
Robin asks, is there an anticipated date for harmonization in the EU for this guidance?
Robin, that's an excellent question. Anytime you're talking about legislative and regulatory bodies, it's a crapshoot. I mean, the only thing that I'm certain of is that there's an election in the United States here in early November, but aside from dates as far as when legal bodies and regulatory bodies and legislative bodies are going to harmonize something, I don't know that that's been published that I'm aware of. I know also in Europe there's significant changes happening to the medical device directives and IVD directives. These are becoming regulations in Europe. I've heard that that's anticipated to go into full effect as soon as this year, but could even creep into 2017. So I don't know that date's been set.
Eckert asks, are you able to name some companies who are early adapters for better engineering efficiency and live under the new 1345 regime?
Eckert, that's an excellent question. I'm going to confess, I'm not aware that any company off the top of my head who has implemented and been certified to ISO 1345 2016 yet. This is the practice varies from one registrar to the next. So I would recommend, if you're not certified, I would recommend contacting some of these ISO registrars. There are several out there. If you need a list of who those options are, get a hold of me. I'd be happy to suggest a few contacts. But they would be the best guide as to companies who have gone through the certification process.
My buddy Rick Stockton's on the line, and you met him at 10X. He asks, as a medical designer consultant, as a mechanical designer consultant, what is my best path to preparing to have design documentation that is most readily transferable to my client's QMS?
Oh, wow. I was waiting for the twist to the question. So did you plan him? Did you tell him to ask that question?
Why, is that like a layup for you? Is that what you wanted?
No. It's all these questions have, of course, nuances, but the interesting twist to that is if you're responsible for design and development activities, it's important that medical device companies realize that even though they may outsource that as a service to a company like Mr. Stockton's, or is he a doctor or just Mr.? I can't remember. He's pretty smart. He's probably Dr.
Mr. Doctor.
Mr. Dr. Stockton.
Yes.
The expectation, even though that might be outsourced to a company, the medical device OEM, the company who's putting their name and label on the product and selling that under their brand, it still needs to adhere to and ensure that they have design and development and files and design history files that show with objective evidence and documentation that that process has been followed. So if they've outsourced that to Mr. Stockton, then they should be expecting that he's able to provide objective evidence to that. Now there's a bit of a, and I'm sure Mr. Stockton is going to do that as well, make sure that his processes in place align with design and development and design controls, best practices, and deliver that as a package to the company. But it can be, sometimes companies look at this as, oh, well, I hired a supplier to do contract design services or contract manufacturing services. So as the medical device company, I kind of wash my hands of it and I don't have to do anything more about that. Remember when I talked about some of the changes to the purchasing and supplier controls, there's an expectation that you identify and assess the risks that those suppliers provide, because they're providing you services, but you need to make sure that you've done the proper due diligence, qualification, evaluation of those suppliers, and that you get the documentation and objective evidence that you need. Remember, you're going to be sitting across from the auditor or that FDA inspector, so make sure that you have the proof and evidence at your fingertips.
I'm going to give you a special succinct challenge because we have at least a dozen or two more questions and we're running short on time. So with that in mind, JD asks, is there a gap analysis available comparing ISO 1345-2016 and 21 CFR 820?
There is. And JD, it's very, very easy to do at this point. You see that link on your screen, greenlight.guru/QMS/audit/checklist. All you have to do is click that, and we'll get that to you. It's a special gift to the listeners of this webinar.
Sarah asks, if you make devices that do not qualify as medical devices, that is, they're used for the environment or for animals, do you have to conform to the ISO standard for all your products, including design controls?
Well, ISO 1345 is, Sarah, you're asking a very interesting question. ISO 1345 is specific to the medical device industry, and I can speculate a few twists and turns on Sarah's question. I don't know if her company has any medical devices at all or no medical devices at all, but I'll answer it the first way, where their company has a portfolio of products. Some of them are med device, some of them are non-med device, some of them maybe for other uses. If her company has put in place and is certified to ISO 13485, the expectation would be that their quality management system adheres to that and that their company follow their quality management system. So that's the first way I will answer that. The second scenario is Sarah's company has no medical devices. They only focus on animal and non-medical device applications. Well, 1345 may not be all that applicable. It may be something that she wants to put in place because it's a pretty good standard that defines best practices. She may also want to consider something like an ISO 9001 if she has zero medical devices in her business. And if you have a quality management system, again, the expectation is that you follow that. So for design control and design and development, that's going to be dependent on which version of ISO you put in place and whether or not you're under the jurisdiction of FDA or other regulatory bodies.
Elliot asks, with the increased focus on risk management of products and processes, is it your understanding that there would need to be a risk analysis in changing from one method to another? For example, switching from to FTA from FMEA?
Yeah, Elliot, that's a really insightful question. So risk management as a practice, there's an overview that describes the different phases and stages of risk management. It starts with planning, goes through analysis, assessment, evaluation, control, risk reduction, so on and so forth. As far as the items that you mentioned, FTA is fault tree analysis, FMEA, failure modes, effects analysis. Those are very specific tools that you use to conduct certain steps in the risk management process. If you're only using one of those tools, like maybe you only have fault tree in place, and you're calling that risk management, then your risk management process is not in alignment with 14971. If you only have FMEA in place, your risk management process does not meet ISO 14971. So you'll be exposed, you'll be something that you want to shore up and clear up if that's the case. But as far as being able to use fault tree versus FMEA, I would expect that you will have a toolbox, so to speak, that lists a number of different tools that you may use for various scenarios and cases. You want to pick the right tool for the right situation. Don't shove every single risk management scenario through one tool set, but do make sure that you have an overarching approach when it comes to risk that aligns with 14971, and that's the key thing.
Bill asks, can you comment a little about the ability for your software to meet electronic records requirements in both the U.S. and Europe?
Bill, we got you covered. I mean, that's the simplest I could put it. The entire platform is built around the best practices and expectations when it comes to Part 11 and Annex 11, when it comes to electronic record keeping, electronic signatures, revision control. All of those things are baked in and built into the Greenlight platform, because that's a requirement if you're going to sell a eQMS solution into the medical device industry. You better know what you're talking about. And folks, I want you to understand, just because a company says that they're Part 11, you need to challenge them a bit. You need to ask the hard questions. You need to ask them what that means to them, because sometimes they don't go beyond the surface. But here's what Part 11 means to you. You need to have I can't do 100% of the Part 11 and software validation for you. Some of that you'll have to do on your end. And one of the things that you need to make sure is that you have test results and protocols and the ability to do some testing on your end to be able to make that claim that your software is validated. And yes, we have that. We have IQ, OQ, PQ, documentation and protocols and test cases. We can set up test environments. We provide that to you. We'll walk you through that entire process.
Michelle asks, how can you integrate this with a paper-based system that's already established?
Michelle, that's a fantastic question. Some of the companies that are looking at making improvements and improving their efficiency, and some of those companies like you that realize that paper is the most expensive process and the most time-consuming and one of the most riskiest approaches, they make that decision each and every day. And so we have part of our customer success team. One of their challenges with you will be to establish a quality plan. Just about those 5 steps that I mentioned earlier. One of those steps is determine scope, determine the gaps, assess the situation. And so we'll put together a quality plan. We'll work on a transition and moving everything from paper into a Greenlight Guru platform so that you can use that paper, start a bonfire, and roast some hot dogs.
Sounds appetizing. Stephen asks, does the new standard have any changes around what FDA calls SOUP, software of unknown provenance?
Yeah, the 13485 standard doesn't really go into that per se. I mean, there are a lot of hooks, so to speak, or references to other industry standards, like I mentioned the 62366 from usability, 62304, there's references there from a software design and development perspective. Validation is expected as well. So there are some expectations, but nothing explicitly defined quite to that nature.
Okay, we have a couple of questions, so I won't read them, but they all relate to how 9001 and 1345 relate to one another, and are there conflicts?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, they're I mean, it used to be that ISO 9001, 2008, and ISO 13485, 2003 were very much in sync with one another, almost clause for clause. Something happened in 2015, 9001 changed, it's now 2015, and really the layout, the format of that standard also changed. And that was one of the big decision points that the working group for 1345 had to determine. Do they also change the layout of the 1345 standard to stay in alignment with 9001, or do they continue to stay in alignment with basically the format, the methodology, the layout of 1345-2003? And the decision was made to stay in alignment with 1345-2003. So long story short is the format is a bit different from 9001, 2015 to 13485-2016. However, 2016 does have an annex, Annex B. It's in that standard that basically describes and defines the similarities and differences. So there is a roadmap in the standard.
Okay, and then for risk management, are both now, no, I don't have that right. For risk management, is product risk management and project risk management both covered during the entire development phase?
You said product and process?
Product and project.
Oh, project. Oh, okay. Product, that's very much an expected behavior with respect to, making sure that your processes meet ISO 14971 and you're ensuring that the product is safe and effective. As far as project risk management, that's really more of a business approach per se. And technically speaking, that's not required or covered as part of ISO 14971 or even ISO 13485 per se. However, I would, as a project manager, a person who's done this before, I would highly recommend that project risk management be incorporated into your processes. It's just a different methodology.
Okay, I'm going to have to make this be the last question. There are at least a dozen I didn't get to. John, while I'm doing that, why don't you go ahead and put up your email address on the screen so people can write you directly, and John will get a copy of everything that you have asked, so they'll be able to follow up with you directly. Sarah asks, obviously all the changes to 1345 2016 are important, but after conducting the gap analysis, is there an area or two that you would prioritize as being most critical for a successful transition?
Sarah, that's a really, really insightful question. And Joe, while I buy myself some time to think about Sarah's question, my colleague Nick has said that he put my email address in the chat window so that if anybody wants that, they can do so. And for those of you that are taking notes, it's JON.SPEER@Greenlight.Guru. So, but Sarah, I would say the big thing is really that gap analysis is going to be key. Understanding, because I don't know what your current process is. I don't know how you do with respect to compliance. I don't know if there have been issues in previous audits and inspections before. So, those are going to be your guide. I would say your internal auditing process, your external audits, those are all going to be insightful to give you some tips and pointers of which areas are going to be most impacted by this transition to 2016. I can tell you right away, risk management is obviously, hopefully obviously by now, one of those areas that are going to be key, and one of those areas that many companies need to improve upon as far as making sure you have continuous risk management throughout the entire product life cycle. That's one of those areas that falls apart a little bit. Most companies are very good with risk management during the design and development process, not as good once that design transfer happens. So that would be an area. And then this other area that I emphasize today is traceability, making sure that you have traceability of all of your design and development activities. That's key, and a lot of companies struggle with that approach. I mean, which is clear when you think about FDA, number one reason for 43 inspectional observations still to this day, 2016, is related to design controls. So keep that in mind.
John, thank you for a great event. We have a full 50% of the people who signed up still online, a half hour overtime. So you offered a lot of great information. And we have recorded this. We will make it available for everyone. And any final thoughts, John?
Well, I was just going to say, Joe, anybody that asked a question that we didn't get to today, feel free to contact me. Again, it's John, Jon, period, S-P-E-E-R, at greenlight.guru. And you can find out if you didn't get my email address jotted down, go to greenlight.guru, go to contact us and submit your question there, and I'll be happy to respond to your question as best I possibly can, okay?
John Greer, ladies and gentlemen, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you online soon. Bye for now.